it became very clear that it's weird that the thing we are, and we're always locked in, consciousness, is something that Western academia has such a hard time understanding or even defining. And that seems like such a weird thing. We're so good at decoding everything and like having rovers on Mars and quantum computers and amazingly smart AI. But the thing we are, our essence, is something that seems so elusive.
Keep watching to learn more. For early access to our videos and live stream events, sign up for our free weekly newsletter at newthinkingaloud.org. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
You are warmly invited to visit transformationandintegration.com to access additional resources that support the journey through deep transformation, and to learn more about the ongoing offerings at Center for Transformation and Integration, including our certified training in transformational coaching with an emphasis in somatic integration therapy. I look forward to welcoming you there. Hi, I'm Leanne Whitney, depth psychologist and guest host, working alongside longtime host and producer Jeffrey Mishlove and my other colleagues here at New Thinking Aloud. Today, I'm honored to welcome Dr. James B. Glattfelder to the show. Dr. Glattfelder is an author, academic, and quantitative researcher. He holds a master's in theoretical physics and a doctorate in the study of complex systems, both from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich. His research focuses on decoding complexity and the metaphysics of existence. He's the author of 2 major works, Information, Consciousness, Reality, and his most recent book, The Sapient Cosmos, What a Modern Synthesis of Science and Philosophy Teaches Us About the Emergence of Information, Consciousness, and Meaning, which offers what he calls syncretic idealism, a wide-ranging integration of complexity science, analytic idealism, the perennial wisdom traditions, and the contemporary philosophy of consciousness. In today's conversation, James and I explore the foundations of his inquiry, from his earlier encounter with quantum physics through the questions that eventually led him beyond the limits of physicalism. And then we turn to the hard problem of consciousness, the role of psychedelic experience, and the relationship between contemplative traditions and rigorous science. Along the way, we touch on symbolic knowing, synchronicity, and what it might mean to live in a participatory universe, especially at a moment when humanity is, by many accounts, in a crisis of meaning. James is joining me remotely from Zurich, and now I will switch over to the internet interview. Hi, James. Welcome to New Thinking Aloud. Thank you for joining me. It's nice to be with you today.
And thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I look forward to our exploration. I'm wondering, though, if you could start by introducing yourself to the audience, maybe through your youth and into your studies. Like, what captured your imagination early on? And what is that arc of imagination and interest that's led you to write your latest book?
Looking back, it seems like a bunch of coincidences which happened and sort of guided me towards where I am today. And it kind of started when I was pretty young, 15, when I kind of got introduced to physics, quantum physics, through a chemistry teacher who then sort of introduced me to these chemistry ideas I wasn't familiar with, and then quickly realized that there was this level of quantum mechanics that describes how chemistry works. And that drew me into wanting to study theoretical physics, which then many years later I did, with kind of the expectation that this is such a great tool for understanding how the universe works. And after studying theoretical physics, I should know more how things work, which didn't happen because there's more questions than answers once you go down that rabbit hole. And then later on, when I did my PhD in complex systems, which is kind of like switching from, so physics is using mathematics as a tool, the language to describe how things work, and complexity science is kind of abandoning that and using algorithms where you only can like track the evolution of a system by letting it evolve algorithmically, and there's no real shortcuts you can take by solving equations because it's too complex. And there I started to realize that there was this philosophical aspect of physics, and there's this thing called metaphysics, and you kind of have to think about this as a scientist. And I realized that this was something that totally got excluded in, when you study science and physics, and no professor or not many are actually interested in that. And that's what got me sort of, I don't know, broadening my sort of area of interest. And then at one point, it became very clear that it's weird that the thing we are, and we're always locked in, consciousness, is something that Western academia has such a hard time understanding or even defining. And that seems like such a weird thing. We're so good at decoding everything and like having rovers on Mars and quantum computers and amazingly smart AI. But the thing we are, our essence, is something that seems so elusive that there's theories saying that the illusion is to say, no, your consciousness doesn't actually exist. It's just something you think you have, but you're just like overestimating your sort of who you are, and this is more like an illusion. And these were sort of the topics I started to track and write about in my books, because on one hand, when I write, it's also a process for me to understand more and like really go down these rabbit holes and do the research, and then trying to sort of convey the ideas to an audience of interested lay people. And that's where I started with Information Consciousness Reality, which I wrote from 2013 to 2019 or something as a side gig, where I didn't quite reach the sort of the metaphysical position I'm at today, which only happened later with, when I realized that, I'm sure we'll talk about that later, metaphysical idealism, this idea that consciousness is a fundamental thing of existence, and actually the physical is derived from that this is seeing a renaissance in Western philosophy. I mean, it was in there, but then it kind of got ignored, and the analytical philosophers were saying, no, this is very bad thinking, it's not rigorous, so we should stop doing this. And now it's seeing a renaissance, and this goes hand in hand with the psychedelic renaissance, where we are not only rediscovering that psychedelics are invaluable tools for therapy, for helping people with mental health issues, but that they're also a tool to explore consciousness and potentially reality. So this was kind of the sort of the new thing with the Sapient Cosmos, that I went all in on idealism, and then started to actually understand or discover that most cultures seem to always have had this intuition and have always worked with this. So beginning with shamanism, which is a technique of visiting the non-physical reality through changes in consciousness, be it through trance or entheogens. And this goes through these themes, the meditators in ancient India, and then also kind of the mystics who apparently spontaneously reach these states of non-ordinary consciousness where they experience this layer of reality beyond the physical. And now with the modern psychonauts who are doing this in a in an academic, scientific way. And now, amazingly, nearly every university has a psychedelic research facility, which is wild, because not too long ago, if an academic said, I've taken LSD or psilocybin or ayahuasca, you would be discredited and kicked out. So we've come a long way in rediscovering what most cultures have always known. So that's like, yeah, it's a bit sad, but at least it's promising.
Right. Yeah, we're coming back around. Um, well, I'd like to hone in on a couple things actually. This idea of science being embedded in philosophy, like to practice science without claiming the ontological underpinning or what the philosophical background is to your science is completely detrimental to unearthing a full picture. That's my way to sort of briefly say it, but I think that's what you're pointing to. And maybe you could explore that a little bit more for us.
Exactly, and that was sort of this big error, that this idea of now it used to be called materialism, now it's physicalism. The idea that only physical reality obviously exists, and everything within it can be explained through physical processes, and that's all there is to the story. So applying this to consciousness, it means that one day we'll understand consciousness by looking at the brain and neurons firing. But this is already a metaphysical commitment. Saying that there's only this physical reality is a metaphysical statement, because you can't prove it or disprove it, because I don't know if I'm dreaming now. There's no way I can, kind of Kant's noumenon or the thing in itself, kind of this idea that I never can touch reality. I can only experience it through my consciousness, and my consciousness can be very distorting. So I don't really know what's out there. So there's no certainty. So saying only physical reality exists is a metaphysical commitment, and it makes sense. It's very kind of intuitive, and with sort of the scientific revolution, this became baked into scientific thinking, and people believed that this was something that science was dictating. And if you are an anti-physicalist, you're being anti-science and you're being irrational. And only now we're realizing that this is a category error, because physicalism is a metaphysics disguised as a scientific statement. And that's bad, because science only says how stuff works, and it's very impartial to a metaphysical underpinning, because by definition, metaphysics begins where physics ends. So science tells us how stuff works, but the question of what is space, what is time, what is matter, these are metaphysical questions. And scientists, mostly being bad philosophers or very uninterested in philosophy, just made this very bad category error of sort of mixing the two things. And that's kind of been a bad move, because it really constrained the thinking of a lot of scientists. And we saw this when quantum quantum mechanics was discovered, when Planck stumbled upon this new realm, where in the beginning the pioneers were very open to thinking about what is this telling us? We are seeing this new level of reality which makes no sense. It's very incoherent and illogical. What is going on here? And then the next generations just gave up and said, look, just shut up and calculate, do the math. You can build quantum computers. You can build all the technology we have, which is based on this knowledge, which is mediated through this language of mathematics, and just don't think about the philosophical implications. So to this day, we have no interpretation of what quantum physics is telling us. And it seems to be something which actually is not, which you cannot access just through rational knowledge. It seems to be some trans-rational thing that's going on at the basis of reality. But for most sort of sober scientists, you can't accept this. It's like, no, one day we'll understand it, and actually it's not so mysterious. It just looks mysterious. So that's why I believe like the right move to go forward is sort of this idea of scientific spirituality. So you're mixing both. You're guided by science and like this empirical world which has rules and regularities that we know. Of course, you have people saying the world is flat, but that's then more like a mental health issue than an empirical fact that people can validate. So you have the science part, but the spirituality part is exactly the opposite, looking inside and working with this wealth of reality which appears in your consciousness, and especially when you tweak it through meditation or trance or psychedelics, that suddenly you access radically new and novel experiences of being and reality which before you've never come across. I mean, and that's what William James, in the Varieties of Religious Experience, or whatever his seminal book, the qualities of these experiences, one of them is ineffable. You cannot talk about it, which means that you just made an experience which just transcends language and concepts and any experience you've had until that day, which is absolutely wild because this tells us something, and luckily now we have the philosophy of psychedelics and philosophers who are having these experiences and seriously are thinking about what this means, not only in terms of consciousness, but what exactly are we discovering inside, and why does it feel that it's something beyond the physical? I mean, like the experiments with DMT, where now they are managing to use infusions where, so when you freebase DMT, that's like 15 to 10 minutes where you're in that state and then you come back. And with infusion, you can stay in that state for like an hour. And the idea is to really study what this realm is. And interestingly, people nearly always have entity encounters. So they encounter beings they perceive as something, a unique consciousness outside of their own. And there's like different categories. So these seem to be stable experiences. And there's even this phenomenon of being locked out, where people who smoke too much DMT are not granted access anymore into this realm. They're literally being rejected. So you have all these dynamics going on I mean, this is just wild and crazy. And only now we're actually realizing this and taking this seriously and doing these experiments in controlled environments at universities. So it's inside and outside. We need both to progress. And we cracked the scientific part, the looking out. So now as a society, we should maybe listen to the tools that have been around for very long time of how you access your inner dimension of being.
Yeah, the frontier. The frontier has changed. It might still be Mars for some, but there's a whole new disciplines or categories being opened by the inner depth work, which is, as a depth psychologist, it's beautiful to see. And it from your sort of broad historical take, it's like when the quantum realm was discovered and the academic ethos became shut up and calculate, it was kind of like a double down, is what it sounds like. Like there was a double down on the physicalism or the mathematics. And that's now, I don't know if backfired, but it's no longer a frontier. Like string theory, like all the theories in quantum physics aren't necessarily getting us where we want to go, in other words.
And that's another thing where the younger generation of scientists are reevaluating what went wrong. How come we haven't progressed in the foundations of physics for, 20, 30 years? I mean, string theory was amazing, but it was just amazing mathematics. It hasn't said anything useful about the structure of reality. It's just not, it can't be applied to that. It's just beyond anything we could ever technologically achieve to test. So that was like the biggest game in town for ages. And just literally, 80% of theoretical physicists were working on that. And now we're realizing that the mathematicians should work on it because it's beautiful math and it's opened up new doors there. But we haven't progressed. So how come there was this explosion in, sort of relativity, the quantum, and then it just plateaued and we haven't progressed. So what happened? And I believe the younger generation of scientists is revisiting, like, okay, what are the assumptions? Like, what are the beliefs? What's the metaphysics? And then really sort of questioning, okay, is this legitimate? Physicalism could be right or not. We don't know, but at least to have the conversation and think about, okay, what are alternative views or metaphysics. And what's seems to be happening also in theoretical physics is that maybe consciousness somehow has to be put into the formalism. So there's like a couple of people who are working on quantum information or whatever who are like trying to build models where you have sort of this first person perspective and the rest evolves around this, or these interpretations of quantum mechanics like cubism, where literally you have agents that are decoding what's happening. So placing consciousness into the formalism seems to be sort of a good step forward, and this seems to be happening. So yeah, let's see what happens there. But just quickly to summarize our knowledge of consciousness. So one academic counted that there's by now 350 different theories of what consciousness is. Scientific theories from quantum, from idealism, from like the whole shebang. So having 350 competing theories tells us that we have no clue. I mean, this is like really bad. And we still don't even have a definition of what consciousness is. So, I mean, the best goes back to the philosopher of mind, Thomas Nagel, who wrote this paper about what is it like to be a bat? Like, how would a bat with echolocation, how would reality feel? And so the most sort of benign definition of consciousness still today is what it's like to be something. So there's like this inner light you have, someone is observing. And that's exactly this crux of the hard problem of consciousness, which really sort of showed the sort of where this academic study of consciousness within a physicalist framing really breaks down. So it's a question, how does stuff that's not conscious and doesn't have an inner view, how can it produce it? Where does this come from? And David Chalmers posed this question in 1994, and since then, the philosophy of mind has been a mess of two camps fighting against each other. One of the one side saying, no, your consciousness doesn't exist. Illusionism, Daniel Dennett. Consciousness is an epiphenomenon. It's there, but it has no causal power. And you have the idealists and panpsychists on the other side saying, look, consciousness is where it starts and everything else is derived. And of course, no one can win. But the hard problem just really sort of showed that there is an issue in how we're scientifically approaching consciousness. And also to mention, I mean, this has only been taken seriously since 1990. Before that, consciousness was a topic not to be studied. So it was like this taboo topic for young scientists who were told, don't touch it. It's going to be bad for your career because it's unscientific, like the soul. Consciousness is like, yeah, it's this weird concept. And only since 1990 with Christoph Koch, where they and Crick, Francis Crick, where they published this idea of neural correlates of consciousness. So, what are people feeling or experiencing when certain neurons fire? And that was like 1990 when consciousness started to be taken seriously in academic circles. So it's not too surprising that we haven't really progressed too much. And my take on it is that, so I kind of believe that idealism is the correct thing because it seems to be something you can experience, again, through altered states of consciousness. So it doesn't, I mean, it's really hard to understand rationally, like, what does it mean? Like consciousness, there's this fundamental field of consciousness that's transpersonal, has no perspective. I mean, these are all like really like abstract, hard things to think about. I mean, you have good philosophers of mind who try and explain this in detail, but it seems to be more persuasive if you actually experience these things. And I believe that sort of what these meditators and psychonauts and mystics are experiencing points to this fundamental layer of awareness that seems to be like where you start to build being and reality. So, but again, this could be wrong. We don't know. So it's like, how do we deal with this fundamental uncertainty of never knowing? I mean, I could be a brain in a vat kept alive and fed with artificial electrical signals that would make the same world appear to me. So yeah, it's tough, and as we don't have the culture and tradition of working with consciousness, we don't really know. I mean, like the shamans with trance or entheogens. I mean, for me, these are consciousness technologies. Or in the Vedas, the meditation, like different ways to meditate in Buddhism. These are technologies of consciousness which the Western mind just totally was oblivious to, and only now like is starting to sort of become interested in and trying to include in a bigger description of reality and consciousness.
Yeah, because we excluded it. Could you say it went into just pure mysticism? I think, right, that's what you're pointing to, like Eckhart, or Meister Eckhart, or yeah, some of the saints, Teresa of Avila. Like th- our mystics became so marginalized um, that consciousness studies, if you will, um, went underground or just went to the margins and was only classified as religion. And it seems like that's part of your oeuvre there, is to sort of get the dialogue going, more robustly in order to examine, yeah, where maybe we went off track, but also how we can get back into dialogue that's functional and helps us all.
The claim of science is that you need to have this third person perspective, this detached perspective from nowhere, which doesn't exist because there's no view from nowhere, as also Thomas Nagel wrote about. But this is kind of the starting point, that you have this objective reality and it's unbiased. And everything which is subjective is fallible. People misremember, they lie, they can be deluded or whatever. So that's why this subjective content was ignored for so long in science. And only now, yeah, scientists are figuring out how can we bring this in with knowing that there can be a lot of error there, that there's like, yeah, people can again just have wrong recollections, and but just sort of knowing that these subjective experiences are very important. And like I'm here in Zurich at the technical university, the ETH, they in the cognitive sciences department, their psychedelic research group is only doing phenomenology. So they're just listening to what people are experiencing during these states and cataloging it and just writing down what's happening. And once the corpus is big enough, then it's like, okay, what is happening here? Can we like build a theory? Are there themes? But this is like really sort of square one for sort of addressing this uh, this topic from this subjective perspective. And science has been notoriously bad in, because it just thought this is not worth like taking seriously and working on. And only now we're like, okay, what is happening in this content of consciousness? What are these people experiencing? And again, the DMT entity encounters, this is a stable thing that keeps happening. Why? And why are there these different categories? Like, what is going on there? And to start to address that, you just have to sit down and listen to people and just know that, okay, there can be a lot of bias and a lot of skewing, but still that's like the baseline you have to start with, and then wade through this information and try and figure out what's happening there. And perhaps the idea of this external objective reality is more of kind of a construct that we come up with than something that's actually really out there. Because a lot of people, I mean, some scientists like John Wheeler, they had this intuition that it's a participatory thing that's happening here. So consciousness isn't just isolated and like only indirectly reacts with the physical through our bodies, but that there's actually a deeper link that somehow, yeah, our thinking, our inner life somehow interacts with the unfolding of the universe, which seems to go into the what Jung was saying and Pauli with synchronicity. That and again, this to me points to idealism, that if it is the same thing inside and outside, then it kind of makes sense that there's a mapping between the two, that my inner states can find like sort of or can sort of map onto these outer states, and there can be things which connect, which make sense, which seem to be relevant, which seem to have sort of a higher layer of causality, which we don't otherwise see. Um, yeah, I mean, these things have been around for a long time, and we're still talking about synchronicity because it's something people keep experiencing. And yeah, I mean, with Pauli, the Nobel-winning quantum physicists, Jung, they sat down and really were thinking about, okay, what could be going on here? Why is this happening? Is there this higher structuring we haven't discovered yet? And how can we sort of make sense of it? And I find the easiest is that, yeah, it's just a mapping between inner and outer patterns that sometimes sync up and correlate.
Well, now idealism is the direction that you headed. Are you familiar with the work of Harold Ottmansbacher, who does a lot of work on the Jung-Pauli conjecture, and he leans towards like the dual aspect monism? I don't know if that's something that you've considered and decided to move away from, or yeah, where are you as far as idealism and dual aspect monism?
So I recently had a long discussion with my LLM about this. So first of all, I find it hard to distinguish between dual aspect monism and neutral monism. Somehow they're similar, but so I don't know, maybe it's better just to collapse it into one. I think that's very sort of technical, like what the difference is between the dual aspect or the neutral monism. But essentially, a lot of the things that I see as sort of persuading me to believe in idealism can be just as well framed in neutral monism. And my LLM kept pushing back when I'm like, hey, but look, this piece of data, is more confirming my point of view. And then it always pushed back and like could show me that actually, no, that just is valid. And it just comes down to sort of this commitment that I'm a conscious entity. So for me, it's more natural and more welcoming and warmer to imagine a universe that is based on consciousness, which I have, because this monism posits that there is this unknowable substrate behind the things. So it's kind of adding this unknown which I can never know about. So it's kind of it's a bit of a colder metaphysics because it's just putting in this new thing, saying, look, here is the explanation, but you can't reach it because that's the nature of it. But it's interesting that, I mean, they both fit in the same family of sort of metaphysics, and they both totally just like I find just make a really good case of why physicalism is just really bad and naive and silly and shouldn't be done anymore. But to distinguish between the two really just comes down to what resonates inside of you. And for me, it was like, look, I'm a conscious entity. So for me, that resonates more. And the LNM was like, yeah, you're right, because I'm not. So I kind of get that you would come from that position. So that's fine.
I love that. I'm a warm mammal, and I want to have warm theories that, because again, through complexity and emergence, it's the totality. Like the reductionism, it's finding that balance between how do we look objectively, but also understand that there ultimately is no hardcore objective reality, that quantum physics has told us that the observer is always part of the equation. And where you put the cut is, I guess, one of the big dilemmas, the difference between pure consciousness, because you brought up the contents of consciousness. And I'm wondering actually if we can maybe go down there a minute with those contemplative traditions, like the metaphysics in Sankhya, which is one of the orthodox Hindu philosophies. It's a dualistic metaphysics, which yoga also uses, where there's pure consciousness and then the contents of consciousness. And mind, actually, the category is called prakriti. It's Purusha and Prakriti. And mind in that system of thought is actually in the category of prakriti. It's in the phenomenology. It's part of what we see. Like there's pure awareness, pure seeing, and then what are we seeing? Maybe tell me how you've contemplated also like that system of thought, or where you are as far as mind in, let's say, Kastrup and a lot of the idealism. Mind and consciousness are uh, possibly conflated if you look through some of the metaphysics in Orthodox Hindu philosophy. Yeah, I just kind of want to open that doorway and see if there's anything that you've explored or that you want to add there.
Um, so I have sometimes tried to practice meditation of like, yeah, sort of going into that state of awareness where you're kind of observing the observer. You're not part of the narrative, the monkey mind. You're just the pure awareness behind kind of the witness behind all the content that's going on, which I never managed to do. But just reading what some of the Buddhist monks talk about, especially Mathieu Ricard, the French scientist turned Tibetan monk, who they like to use him to do neuroimaging studies on his brain because he's like, yeah, many 10,000s of hours of meditation. And he was saying that it's kind of like the same, like uh, in science with the microscope, when you zoom in and zoom in and zoom in, and kind of the meditation he does the same. It kind of goes deeper and deeper and deeper. And he was saying at one point you fall out and then you fall into this field of pure awareness, this space field, I interpret it. So this the idealism field. So it's I mean, for me it's only sort of reading what other people have experienced, but I I don't really know. I mean, again, it's our language. It's so hard. Like, what is consciousness? What's the mind? What is intelligence? How are, and then again, it just comes down to what I'm experiencing now is just this influx of phenomenology, and where does that stand? And so, yes, it is hard. And I like when I saw David Chalmers the last time at a conference, the first thing when he came out was like, oh, nothing is easy in the philosophy of mind, and it's so hard. And that seems to be sort of this essence that there's like, if you try and rationally go into the details, it's really hard. There's just so many things that can trip you up, and that's sort of been a bit of my evolution in sort of the last year or so, that I've become less sort of hyper focused and interested in just rationality. I mean, it's a great tool, but it's just limited, and just knowing that there's these experiential modes of being. Through altered states, which allow you to experience things which are trans-rational. They transcend what your rational mind can wrap itself around. And I find this is sort of an access to knowing, which again has been totally ignored by the Western mind. That these non-orthodox ways of gaining insights, and maybe that's also something that's preventing us from sort of progressing here, that we're trying to sort of rationalize it and talk about it, whereas maybe this is something that's only experientially accessible. And I mean, like the idea of healing in shamanism, you go to the non-physical realm to get information on how to cure this one person, to find the Icaro or whatever it is. And kind of this idea of having access to sort of non-ordinary sources of knowledge is something which, yeah, for a long time in in kind of Western context was seen as, I mean, that's just a load of BS. Come on, that's you just hallucinating. But maybe that's sort of a better way to sort of understand our own consciousness, not by sort of thinking about it, but just by being it. But that's so hard because we're always kind of in this filter of narrating and yeah. So yeah, I have no clue on how to answer the question. That
Oh,
was one.
well, definitely appreciate the honesty, but also what it really shows is, again, another aspect of the conundrum. Yes, you need to claim the metaphysics, understand the philosophy, but also there's no consensus around these terms that we're even discussing, consciousness and mind, that the Euro-American system of thought, it would really behoove us to narrow down, if you will, or maybe you call it expanding out into, but some consensus of terms. So we know what we're pointing at.
And that's where again, sort of just uh, I keep defaulting to these non-ordinary states, especially through psychedelics. But I find this is just so persuasive. So what two things that many psychonauts keep talking about. One is the experience felt more real than waking sober consciousness, which is a wild claim. How can it be more real than reality? Like, what are you talking about? And that's that often it feels like coming home. It feels like remembering a place you forgot, and you're like, oh wow, this is home, which again seems really wild because how can such a I don't know, transcendental experience so incoherent and wild and like so different to this feel like something familiar and something you've come from. So I find those two things are like pointing to again something deeper, that what we're experiencing here is more like the projection, the construct, the simulation, it's derived. It's not like the essence. It's not what's at the core of it, which you can only experience by radically changing the content of your consciousness by sort of modulating these non-ordinary states.
Yeah, radical empiricism, right? I think that's what William James would have called it, and I think that's what the yogis do. Like it's just radical empiricism. It's the retrieval of all the projections and pulling it back. And in yoga, the art form is actually to still the mind, which I think is what you pointed to also with the French Buddhists. Like it's this idea of like doing that deep work of stilling the mind, and then consciousness or pure awareness actually has no alternative but to show itself. So that's kind of what, like if consciousness is pure seeing, pure awareness, then it will have, and it's fundamental, then there's no alternative ultimately for it to reveal itself because it's fundamental. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah. Which also in the psychedelic transition with this ego death, where the thing you thought you were dissolves, and what then happens is this experience of non-duality and you being everything and fusing and uniting with existence. Again, something, if you talk about it, makes you can't really start to even like access what this means, but this is something that very frequently happens to people. This is an experience that is very reproducible, which again seems weird that the thing you believe you are suddenly is gone and you're still there. Or the Michael Pollan, the author who wrote the book How to Change Your Mind, sort of about the psychedelic renaissance, and he recounts this story when he smoked 5-MeO DMT, where reality one by one, like category by category, started to dissolve. First space, time, everything. And in the end, there was nothingness, but there was still a witness. But it wasn't him but there was still an entity witnessing. And to this day, he says, like, he's really glad that there's something and not nothing, because he's been in the place of nothingness and that was terrible. And we should really be thankful that there is something and not nothing. But he experienced this state of literally nothingness, but the witness didn't go away. It was still there. So again, this speaks to just that there's this field that just this ground state, and that does not go away. So maybe nothingness actually isn't a real category, an ontological category for some reason, which again, I don't know, is like, mind blowing.
It is because another way to possibly enter that same conversation is to say anybody claiming nihilism, their awareness is the thing that's doing the claiming. So even in that situation, it's not somebody who's pulled back into pure awareness, but it's their small self or centered self that's actually claiming that other position.
Yeah.
And that's probably what we're pointing to at the beginning of our conversation. Like that part hasn't actually ever been acknowledged, or it's not acknowledged strongly enough yet, although the tide is turning. What about that for you? Like, is the unconscious, would you call it an ontological category? Is it an epistemological category? And actually, let's also back up and expand this for our audience, right? So, ontology meaning the nature of reality, and epistemology, like knowledge, how we know the world. And also the conflation of those categories can, I think, really trip up consciousness science, if not science overall. That we have to be really clear on those two categories. And I'm curious, where would you place the unconscious? Is that an ontological category for you? Is it epistemological?
So I kind of wonder if it's something that actually exists in the sense that that there's still awareness there, but somehow it's sort of contained and you can't recall it later. Like something sort of I don't know, like with dreams, when you wake up and you didn't think you've dreamt anything, and then suddenly during the day, all of these memories come back, where you kind of realize that you were in a state where things were being witnessed, but somehow it got cut off and you have no recollection of it. And I wonder if like unconsciousness is something like that. There's still some basic awareness happening, but it can't like transport content to your conscious mind. You can't access it. So it's more like a different category of awareness, where there's still stuff going on, but there's like this boundary where the conscious mind cannot penetrate it. And I think Bernardo Kastrup is argues in the same sort of direction, that it exists as a category, but not in the sense that it's not having an inner experience or an inner life. There's still something registering somehow, but I'm not like, I haven't really thought about this too much, and I don't know what his exact arguments are. So this is all very vague and hand wavy. But just I wonder if yeah, the subconscious, unconscious, if that's kind of a bit of a misnomer for what's going on there, that we assume it's like free of experience, which I would assume it maybe isn't.
I would be with you on that misnomer. And to go back to the Indian traditions for a minute, so there's a term avidya, where vidya is wisdom and avidya without wisdom or without seeing. This idea that like ignorance is the thing that's going to block us from this experience of the pure consciousness, that our mind moving in certain directions to go out, actually maybe before we go in, because it's so important to understand these category distinctions in the sense of the pure seeing or the pure consciousness and the contents of consciousness, and everything else is going to be in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, they say the babblings of madmen, because there's no foundation built there for what is actually being seen.
Maybe the ignorance there is actually helping us, like the this idea of the brain being kind of this valve, which Henry Bergson, the philosopher, came up with, and Aldous Huxley then popularized in his book Stars of Perception with his mescaline experience. That sort of, and again, this is very close to idealism, that the brain isn't the producer of consciousness, it's a transceiver and it's a valve. And what psychedelics do is open the valve so there's more throughput. So that's why you have this credible phenomenology and experience of transcendence. But that's not very conducive to survival, because you just cannot function. I mean, you cannot stay alive if you're just sitting and looking at a flower and seeing infinite beauty and structure. So the reducing valve is, Huxley called it has to reduce this influx to this measly trickle of consciousness, which is kind of the state we can then function and do stuff and stay alive and get food and procreate and whatever. But because if you open the valve, that just like these things just become irrelevant, but the consequence would be that you don't survive. So somehow it needs sort of the yin and yang of transcendence, but then also the immanent, like really sort of the down to earth part of existence and like having to eat.
Sure, right. So that spectrum of transcendence and immanence again is another place to like find the balance in. Am I looking and knowing what lens we're using? Am I currently using a microscope? Am I currently using a telescope, right? Am I going in really closely? Am I going out really broadly? But recognizing that we have the capacity to change those lenses through meditation, through the use of psychedelics. And I think that's what you're pointing to, is the importance of even knowing.
And realizing that sober waking consciousness is just one state in this vast spectrum of altered states the brain can go into naturally, spontaneously, with breath work or trance or drumming or substances, whatever. So just kind of this supremacy of this one state of like this sober waking state, and you have rationality in it, and this is the only thing you want to be, because that's the only way you can access knowledge, and everything else is superstition and deluded. I mean, that was a really bad bias that the Western mind sort of slowly now is realizing and has to give up, that there's just so many states you can be in, and you don't, so the one is natural, you default into it, it keeps you alive, but that doesn't mean that this is like it's the only valid state that can give you access to knowledge, or which you actually should always be in. I mean, kind of this idea that and sort of the different realities you can access, these seemingly different layers or realms of reality that you can access by being in these different states of your mind. I mean, this is huge. This is a vast sort of multiverse, and just restricting it to this one tiny slither is it's very reductive.
Yeah, and I definitely want to get to the enchanted and the mystical or mysterious, I guess, elements. But I do want to also put in a word of caution about psychedelics and even meditation work. Like there is cause for caution depending upon people's different mental states or what kind of support they have, because the integration aspect of either of those practices is really important, that you have the right community or the right guides around you to help you through whatever the phenomenological discoveries are through either pathway. I wonder if you could take us into that maybe through your own experiences, because I believe, if I remember correctly, you maybe used some psychedelics when you were younger and had certain experiences, and then you've also used them more recently. So maybe you could guide us through the warnings as well.
I mean, it's very important what you said, but just a little side note. So as you say, also with meditation, so there's this thing of the spiritual ego, which this same spiel that happens with like in sort of normal sort of competing ways humans have, can happen in a spiritual context. And Alan Watts has kind of a funny quote that it's like, people are like, oh, my yoga is faster than yours, and I'm more sorrier for my sins than you are. I love you more than you love me, and like all this one-upmanship in spiritual terms, which is terrible, and that can happen. So one has to be aware that, like human beings always find a way to to somehow manifest a lot of ego, even if you think like in places you would never believe. And sort of my sort of psychedelic experience was as a teenager taking too much LSD and just having a very, again, the subconscious thing. So I was in this state for a couple of hours, which I don't remember hardly anything. So I was having all these very intense experiences, but no recall afterwards of what was happening. So again, something that's like capsuled off from my conscious mind. And as far as I know, nothing, it wasn't like a bad trip or anything. Like, it was just too much. It was just too much transcendence. And that sort of manifested in my psyche as panic attacks happening regularly for 1 year. So that was some way my psyche coped with having this experience. And now recently, I was had this ayahuasca calling. So I had 2 ayahuasca ceremonies in the last 3 months, and each ceremony was on the weekends, so Friday, Saturdays. So it was 2 times drinking ayahuasca. And in this shamanistic tradition, the idea is that in the first night, you kind of open this portal and prepare it. And in the second night, you go through it. And so the first ceremony night was, it felt a bit sort of weird, a lot of, feeling in sort of a strange state of being, but nothing like very psychedelic or also not, I felt not much was happening. And then the second night, sort of being a beginner, I always drank like the smallest amount. And after 10 minutes, when the shaman stood up and initiated the ceremony, I was sitting there with closed eyes, and I suddenly saw the room with closed eyes. And then this whole, just this whole transcendence of symbols and energies and patterns and information and beings and just started to swirl around me. And I was in this state for, I don't know, an hour or two, where my like my rational mind was saying like, oh, this is, I can't, this is too much, this is too crazy, I and it's not stopping. This is just such just too much. This is just crazy, because my intention was like, yeah, like peeking behind the veil, like seeing what's there. And now I was shown that, and I was like, what is going on here? And like also had this entity encounter with this being that didn't feel human or animal or but very this strong presence, and it just felt like this information richness, this complexity, this intelligence behind sort of the physical that structures the physical. That's how it felt. And I was shown this, and this just blew my mind. It was just like, it just like registers as insanity, because it's just so dynamic, the speed, just the information richness. And the next day, I was pretty sure that I'm never going to drink ayahuasca again. That was just like too much. This was like a crazy experience. I did not. I mean, I was hoping to have like a sort of an immersion and being showed, but this was like, this is too much. My mind cannot deal with this. Like it's just kind of the dimension of the intelligence and like my human mind, the discrepancy just like shattered, seemed to shatter my mind. And then 3 months later, so I then decided like, okay, also reading Christopher Bache's LSD in the Mind of the Universe, where he had 73 high dose LSD sessions, where he like really lays out this amazing metaphysics of like what he experienced, where he was saying, it's like a marathon. You sort of, the more you practice, the deeper you can go in, the more coherent you can be in the state, the more recall you had. And I was like, okay, maybe I should go back and try and understand what I saw there. And then 3 months later, I go back. And on the first evening, I'm sitting in the yurt, and it's an hour before the ceremony starts. And my neighbor, so there's this, like this scent they spray, this agua de Florida, which is like a very, it's, even now I don't know how to characterize. Is it sweet? Is it like, it's so many fragrances in it. And so I I smelled for this scent, and it triggered this full on flashback, like this full embodied memory, where again I realized oh wow, this was a state I was in during the second night 3 months ago for quite a long time, and it was just this kind of unbearable state of just intensity. And this was like an hour before before the ceremony was going to start, and I like had this 5 minute full on flashback and recall where I fully remembered and had the full feeling of what this was like. And then I panicked. I was like, I can't do this. So like my instinct was like just to get up and like, I'm not going to do this. But like, yeah, trusting the process and just like surrendering. Um, I did the second ceremony, and again, the first night was pretty like light and preparing, and then the second night I was again immersed into this reality, but this time less intense and sort of the beings there, these feather-like things, the symbols, the intensity, the kind of the loudness was toned down. So kind of the medicine was being more was being sort of nicer to me, and I kind of realized that the first ceremony, the second night, I kind of incurred a little psychedelic trauma. This was really so the danger is real. I mean, these are very, very powerful substances, and the cost can be quite real. And I was glad that I went the second time because this resolved it. And now, yeah, sort of this kind of this feeling that ayahuasca is this like insanely intense and like nearly menacing entity is vanished, and it feels more like sort of a friendly, more like a friend. So I'm happy I could like resolve this. But yeah, these things should be taken seriously. You should know the people you do this with. They should know what they're doing, because there's a lot of scamming and charlatans and people who don't take this seriously. So like with all human endeavors, yeah, it can be really bad and done in a really bad way. So, and again, not everyone should take psychedelics. Maybe find another way to this transcendence. But having had these experiences, really, yeah, it's again this ineffability. You've experienced something that you can't really. In, I mean, you have memories of what happened, but kind of the feeling, the just this being on the other side of this line of like this stable reality, it just fades. It's funny how it just sort of it just fades away and you forget about it. Although it was so intense, it's just sort of being embedded in the physical just kind of draws you and sort of calms you down again. But yeah, sort of the things that can happen during those states can be very unsettling, and depending on your constitution can not be like good for your overall well-being. So
Yeah, I mean, the set and setting so very important to the use of these. I like to call them sacred earth medicines. Would you say surrender? So it sounded like you had the flashback to the intensity, and then I don't know if surrender was a word you just used, but it sounded like that's where you are pointing to, that something in you was able to guide you to, okay, just relax and surrender. The intelligence is there, and I'm going to trust this process. I'm not going to be afraid of
that's
it.
the thing, the trust. And I mean, ayahuasca is this medicine, so it's like trusting that this is a beneficial agent of healing, teaching, whatever. So, and that also seems to be sort of in many, or I think most shaman cultures, that there's always sort of this darkness before the light comes, kind of this initiation phase. I mean, not that that was it for me, but when you become a shaman, there's this shamanic sickness, or this phase where you feel you're dying, or you're close to, like, you're having very intense and very, very overpowering experiences, and you just have to go through them, and then you come out the other side. I mean, Joseph Campbell described this as the hero's journey. It's always the same template. It's the hero goes out and then has to like encounter all this darkness, and then by surviving and going through it, the hero comes back and is bestowed with new powers. and seems to be some eternal sort of template of evolution in different cultures of how this is dealt with.
Yeah, I just want to drop the heroine's journey in there also, which is basically the return to wholeness. The wholeness, it's remembering wholeness. Wholeness is the thing that we always have been, and what we're doing is healing the separation.
And that's also something which came like sort of these insights. So one was like the stupidity of the Western mind, like being so smart but so stupid, and the other thing just like this patriarchal template of like not having these cyclical, these feminine aspects of being with the cycles, with the nurturing, and how it's always like sort of this linear sort of conquer and extract, and how this is like so deeply ingrained in Western society that we don't even see it. It's like invisible. And yeah, like even only recently I came across what's her name, Gimbutas, I don't know her.
Maria.
Yeah, where it's like, how is this not taught in, like, why why do you like have to sort of really specialize in sort of anthropology and archaeology to know that like the first symbol of divinity that humans ever revered was the goddess, and that this was like persisting for a long time before the severance, and then the shift from the nurturing goddess to the angry father god who punishes. Like this is such a fundamental shift in like a society's history, and this is just not ever acknowledged. It's like, no, it's always been that. That's because that's the correct like metaphysics, and yeah. So to your point, it's very important to have the both aspects.
Yeah, and so in that trust and that surrender, was the nurturance more available to you then on that second trip, as opposed to the intensity? Did it feel like it was a more nurturing sit?
I literally just like sort of just gave up, in the sense that, okay, you just let it happen, just see what happens, and just go with it, and just like stop thinking, just calm down, don't think, just just like go through the ordeal, and then it was really rewarding. It was like then the second night of the second ceremony was like, really enjoyed it. From the whole thing was like a really lovely experience, where the first 3 times were always like pretty intense, and like energetically struggling, and like these cycles of like elation, and then like collapse, and then tears, and then happiness, and like all these like vortex of energies and feelings. And the last ceremony was like just quiet, calm, like serenity, and a wonderful embedding in this like ayahuasca realm of wherever it is in the transcendental multiverse.
Well, it sounds beautiful. Yeah, but a sometimes treacherous road to get there to the lovely aspects. So again, the warnings are there. The warnings are there, and the research is being done in the West, which is beautiful. But I do think ayahuasca also beautifully leads us into this idea of enchantment and the magical realm, just because of how ayahuasca was discovered. And I know you know that history. I don't know if you want to share that a little bit, because I do think that the discovery of ayahuasca really points to the enchantment and the intelligence of the cosmos.
Sure. If I mean, the kind of the only thing I know is that like from friends who were in the jungle, then asking the shaman like how they discovered it, and she just looked at him like finding this a very stupid question, because obviously the plant teachers told us. What do you think? Like, this was again sort of access to this other worldly knowledge, where the plant teachers guided them to like combine this with that in like with 80,000 plant species, this bark, these leaves. But I don't know what specific discovery you were alluding to? Maybe.
Yeah, that's what I'm pointing to.
Yeah.
That's what I'm pointing to because I do think that discovery points to the enchantment, and it also opens the door to the curiosity because you speak to consciousness as fundamental, but also information. I think you see as fundamental. How do those two aspects interact, or are they the same thing?
So, kind of the thing I lay out in the two books is that, and this goes into sort of this. It's called the information theoretic paradigm in physics, where actually you don't need space and time and matter to construct the physical universe. You just need information. So this can be like the ontological primitive for constructing a physical world. So, but this is like within the box. Consciousness is still the substrate on which this thing is built with information. And I'm still like not clear, like how exactly, like does information like have an inner aspect of some sort of awareness or perception, or is information like just always in the context of like some semantic thing that information needs a decoder, so otherwise it's just random, it makes no sense. So like if the content of information is meaningful, it's always meaningful with respect to a decoding entity, so consciousness. But I'm not a trained philosopher, so these are all very hand-waving intuitions, which I sort of try and bring over from sort of the physics, sort of extrapolating from the physics side, where with this information theoretic approach, you can really get around a lot of issues in like the weirdness of the quantum realm. There's also like how you this question of emergence you talked about before, where in a traditional physicalist setting, the structure and the self-organized complexity we see is just a brute fact. It just happened. Like there's nothing to say about this. This just happened. But actually, if you think about it in a computational context, this is a computation. And then you have Stephen Wolfram, the physicist, like prodigy young physicist, who then came up with this whole novel idea that we shouldn't do physics with equations, we should do it with this complexity approach of simple rules. And he 20 years ago wrote this book called The New Kind of Science, which everyone ignored, and now he's back with kind of sort of version 2 of this idea, where he really now has a framework of these networks updating with simple rules, and the structures that come out are relativity, are quantum mechanics, are like the also sort of the rise to complexity is explained in that. And this is something, I mean, these are bit more fringe sort of topics, but they all fit into this idea that we should understand physical reality in terms of information and information processing, and not just because this is sort of the technology of the time. It's always like, oh, the universe is a clockwork when we had like mechanical things, but that this is actually a fundamental thing, qubits. This is something this seems to be something more fundamental than just our current technology.
And is so the word sapient. I mean, I was so drawn to your book because of that word. Like, how did you choose that word?
Actually, it was a bit inspired by Yuval Harari's *Sapiens*. Kind of the and the idea is just focusing on the intelligence part. So somehow there's, I mean, there seems to be this force in the universe that allows higher levels of complexity and systems to evolve, apparently. I mean, we're seeing this around us on Earth. So this is a form of intelligence. And it's like, it can be understood in computational terms. But then the question sort of becomes that you have this jump from sapience to sentience. So the consciousness part, so that's kind of how I sort of envision it, that you have the fundamental field of consciousness. You have the physical emerging according to these information processing laws. It's intelligent, it builds more structure, and it builds more intricate systems. And this is kind of the sapiens. But then at one point, when these contraptions start to become sophisticated enough, they can tune in, again, this reducing valve idea, they can tune into the base field and channel in the consciousness part. And then the universe becomes sentient. So that's kind of this step. And I thought the sentient universe sounds a bit lamer than the sapient universe. So a marketing spin there a bit maybe as well.
Uh-huh. Again, I was so drawn to the title. I'm going to look down at my paper for a minute here because there was a quote that you wrote in that I grabbed actually from something that you wrote recently. It was an essay on Re-Enchanting the universe.
Yeah.
So I'd like to read it here because it's so delicious. You say, rediscovering ourselves at the center of our own experienceable universe is a truly empowering realization, a realization that makes us fully accountable for our actions. Crucially, we're not only invited to create meaning, but also to recognize the meaning inherent in the world. By practicing mindfulness and exercising symbolic cognition, we can become attuned to the synchronicities unfolding around us according to archetypal principles, the primal templates of order. That passage holds together several things that, I want to think about with you, like the symbolic cognition as a practice, the recognition of meaning rather than its construction, archetypes as templates. Like I thought that passage was so rich. Anything, as I repeat it back to you, anything that comes to mind that you'd like to sort of unpack a little bit?
I believe the symbolic cognition is what shamans inherently do. It's decoding the world around you, the eagle flying over your head, the thunderstorm, that reality is rich in meaning and in symbols, and we have the cognitive apparatus to decode this. And that there's two aspects to meaning. One is the meaning I'm free to choose, but then there seems to be this meaning which is external, which is encoded in these synchronicities, in the unfolding of physical or of the cosmos, just in sort of this cosmic evolution, that there is meaning in that as well, and that there seems to be a purpose and a teleology, that it's going somewhere. It's not just, it's like it's designed to create more and more complexity and have more information processing, and maybe have more sort of vessels and containers to sort of channel in more consciousness from the base field of consciousness. This is sort of where I see the thing going. Like Teilhard de Chardin, his omega point. So he was also thinking that this is sort of a trajectory the universe is going to, this kind of level of more complexity, but also more sort of consciousness going in. And also in sort of the Indian wisdom traditions, that consciousness is seen as an evolutionary path. And I think that's also something that we've sort of bit missed in sort of Western ways of looking at it. We always think like consciousness is the thing we have now and that's going to be like that forever, but that there's also this evolution going on in consciousness, and it's going hand in hand with the unfolding of the physical, that there's also sort of this trajectory that consciousness is evolving and becoming maybe more sort of materialized or sort of inhabited in the physical, which kind of begs the question why things look so terrible, but somehow we're in this transition phase where old systems are breaking, new ones are coming, and it's a big mess in between. And many traditions have told us that we're in that, including the Indians with the Kali Yuga. So that's where we're at, but that doesn't mean that anything is going wrong. It just means that we're in a transition of states and they are often very messy, and that's unfortunate. Well, that's where we're at, and I find this sort of also an enchanted way of looking at all the misery and the things that are objectively terrible in the world we've constructed, and still keep a sense of hope and in positivity.
Oh, I love that sense of hope and positivity. And also the word possibly to point to here is culture. How much culture influence whether we suffer or whether we aim towards well-being? That
Yeah.
the scientific paradigms that we're in are a cultural construction. And like again, as everybody who participates in that culture, these are things that we really need to be aware of, because if we fall into them hook, line, and sinker, then we're just participating. Again, this idea of the participatory universe. We're participating in either the ignorance or the binds or the limitations, as opposed to being part of the movement that can move the energy elsewhere, and at this point towards the paradigm shift that you're pointing to.
And I think that's like the core or the root of the problem, that it's a spiritual issue that we're seeing. Like the problems they're not economic or whatever, technological or but they're spiritual, that sort of individually we've sort of, we don't know what we're doing. Why are we here? What are we doing? So either you have science's metaphysics, the bad one, telling you, look, this is all random. There's nothing to it. There's no meaning. There's no purpose. Any purpose or meaning you see is just you being deluded, and you're going to die, and that's it. And your identity is gone. Or we have these static religious power structures which tell us about these external this external authority which laid down these rules which are never going to change, and that's all the wisdom there is ever to know, which is very disenchanted as well. And there's no sort of actively empowering view that sort of should animate you to like try and be a happier person, like do the things to transform your consciousness and become a happier person, find the tools. And I find that sort of the root of sort of this collective psychosis we're seeing, and this individual sort of dysfunctional way of how society has become, that we don't know what we're doing. Why are we here? And we're kind of, we've lost the sort of the mythology, the myths of like what's happening, and but like myths for the 21st century for a scientifically rationally thinking mind, which we could have. I mean, that's not excluding anything, but I think this is something which we are now slowly coming up with, that there's like idealism is it's rational, and it's also experienceable. So that's great. I mean, that's like something to start with, that like you can explore that. I mean, maybe you make an experience which negates it, and then that's your truth and you go with that. But still, that there's like, just says there's such better ways of trying to sort of make sense of what's going on than what we find in our culture that's sort of being perpetuated over like generations. And maybe we finally sort of break out of that and come up with sort of new mythology.
Yeah, 100%. And again, I do think sort of the suffering well-being guardrails really can help us orient as well. Like, if these views are creating so much suffering, is that really the place we want to be? If we get to determine this experience, like, let's have the well-being as the experience, not the suffering.
Yeah. And also knowing that, I mean, suffering is something that happens in your consciousness. So, I mean, there's like, yeah, Buddhist monks who when Tibet was annexed, who were saying how, yeah, it was kind of hard, but they managed not to experience suffering, although they were being like tortured and it was really bad. But that it's a detachment of like what's happening externally and how you react to it internally. And I mean, it's not easy, and obviously, but it's possible that even in the worst circumstances, you still seem to have the freedom to not react with suffering if you have the right tools to recontextualize, or I don't know what you have to do to reach this incredible state of like inner peace, but it's possible. So again, just sort of pointing to the freedom we have, which usually we're not told. We're not told that, look, you basically have all the tools. There's no guru you have to follow. There's no product you have to buy. You are equipped with the things that allow you to become a happier person and live a life which is fulfilling. And that's something that, I mean, we don't tell our kids. We don't even tell ourselves. And that was also something in the ayahuasca experience that, like, yeah, we have to learn to love ourselves before we can learn to like love the world and try and sort of, or we have to first heal ourselves to heal the world. And it sounds so trivial, but it seems so true because, yeah, kind of self-compassion and not narcissism or ego or whatever is, it's, yeah, that's a hard thing to cultivate, but it seems to be there and possible. So
Yeah, and again, this idea of sort of the boundary conditions are all that, because I honor and deeply hear what you're saying around the internal turn of learning how not to suffer, even in the most extreme circumstances. And I do also think it's a both and. And then that's how, as a culture, we call ourselves not to cause and perpetuate any kind of torture or war, or because we find these unitive elements, because the meaning somehow becomes very interdependent, or it's the emergence perhaps where we're back at with the complexity principle. But so, like birds who the murmurings who all dance together, that somehow we can find that in humanity. So it isn't all the weight isn't on the monks or certain marginalized groups to keep tolerating the suffering, that we can keep calling ourselves together collectively to remove the circumstances that have oftentimes caused the great suffering. Because, like you pointed to, we've got the food, we have the knowledge, but somehow, yeah, it's complex, undoubtedly.
and that's also frustrating because I mean, we could live in the best of all worlds for so many people, like for a vast majority of the world's population, and we choose not to actively, which is so weird. Like, why? How dysfunctional? Like all these systems which we keep perpetuating, which are just like deeply flawed. So there needs to be some fundamental recontextualization. And again, I find things like a better metaphysics helps you there, because with idealism, the idea that it's unity, the thing you are is the thing out there. So automatically fostering compassion for not only like your little tribe, but all beings, and kind of even the nonsense, just like the whole of existence, just realizing that this sense of identity and self is probably the illusory part, and the real story is kind of the interconnectedness of all these things. And again, the physicalism take tells you no, that's not true, and most sort of sort of monotheistic religions tell you that is not true, because God by definition is not human, and there's no bridge, there's no way to, there's separation. So kind of emphasizing unity should be core to any metaphysical or any sort of empowering metaphysical belief system, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I loved Dan Siegel in Interpersonal Neurobiology. Also, he says integration made visible is kindness and compassion.
Yeah,
I
that's like
love
the
that.
natural thing you would, and again, that's the natural thing. If you become a happier person, there's no reason you're gonna like be horrible to other people. Why would you? Like, there's, you want to smile at other people and like hold the door open and be helpful. And there's like no reason to like have show toxic traits while living in society, because that's not any motivation there.
Yeah. Well, maybe again, as these years go on and we get better definitions of mind and consciousness and practices, it will start to fall into place. Hey, you never know, maybe rapidly. So I'm wondering, like 10 years from now, what do you hope, like, would have changed, not only sort of in consciousness studies, but perhaps also in our cultural understanding of consciousness? Like, what 10 years from now, if you think of students or psychonauts or explorers?
Okay, 3 answers. So I hope things are going to be better. I fear they won't be. And at the moment, 10 years seems impossible. Like even the world in 3 years, like at the rate of acceleration and destabilization and like just the velocity, the acceleration, the craziness, like even like what's the world going to be in 1 year? It just seems now like we're at this point where like seeing into the future seems like almost impossible. That it's just it could be anything. It could be there. It could be there, because we're just in this. We're in the like just in the center of the vortex at the moment. It seems, and um, I kind of think that it's probably going to get a bit worse before it gets better. But I'm pretty convinced, or actually, I mean, yeah, I'm pretty certain that it will get better, because that's the thing it does. That the process can't like not do it. That's what's going to happen. That's like intrinsic to the evolution of life and consciousness in the cosmos. But till that happens, it probably is going to get worse. I fear, but
I hear that, and yes, get worse. But then I feel like through our conversation, you've also pointed, like even just pointing to the Tibetan monks, like in this time, our own stabilization, that
yes,
we perhaps each make the choices to do
yes,
the inner work to stabilize ourselves while what's external to us collapses.
yeah,
And then on the other side of that, we will recreate a stable culture and a stable society.
which is probably the reason it's happening. And the yeah, sort of the door it opens, that you have to choose. Am I going to like try and serve life, or am I going to try and destroy it? Like, what team am I going to play on?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I again, the the simple pointers, I think, can be the also be the most gift bearing. Like, which team? Kind, not
Yeah.
kind. Compassionate, not compassionate. Yeah.
Do I want to work on myself, or just focus on status and distraction? Or yeah.
Yeah. Well, James, thank you so much for all of your insights and everything that you shared. And I feel like you've just given some great final thoughts. But yeah, is there anything that maybe you haven't shared yet that you'd like to share with the new Thinking Aloud audience?
Let's try and be happier people, and and enjoy a kinder society through that. I mean, it sounds so trivial and like, but it's so essential, because I mean, so many, just like the work environments, the kind of the pressure, just life has gotten a lot harder, and cultivating happiness just doesn't even register, because you're just fighting for survival and staying afloat, and somehow just like this basic like impulse of just sitting down and like, okay, what am I doing? What's my life? Where am I going? Should things change? Like, so many people don't seem to have even the resources to even just start to sort of open that door, and it's like everyone wants to be happy, so it seems so conflicting and tragic in the end, that yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for helping us relook at the cultural complexes, maybe we would say in Jungian psychology, like these cultural binds. Thank you for helping us look at them and explore them, and again, hopefully be able to take one more step towards a different future.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And for those of you watching and listening, thank you for being with us. You're the reason that we're here in community, exploring our common unity. You are warmly invited to visit transformationandintegration.com to access additional resources that support the journey through deep transformation, and to learn more about the ongoing offerings at Center for Transformation and Integration, including our certified training in transformational coaching with an emphasis in somatic integration therapy. I look forward to welcoming you there.
For early access to our videos and live stream events, sign up for our free weekly newsletter at newthinkingaloud.org. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.